Peace, everyone. Welcome once again to Baddest Chaplain. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for being here. I want to tell you that I'm so glad you're here. Really excited for this conversation we're going to have today with my dear friend, Jeremy Burton. Jeremy is the CEO of Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, Chris, for asking me to join you for this conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Likewise, for sure, for sure. Now, before we jump into it, I had to share with you all that we are fully prepared to speak about Captain America for a Brave New World. As you can see, I have my Cap t-shirt, but Jeremy came prepared as well. Jeremy, you can share with the good people what you brought to the
I
conversation.
brought my Avengers kippah with all of the cast of the first movie, and you can see the Avengers symbol as well. Thor and
Absolutely.
Captain America and everybody.
Everyone's there. Hulk, everybody's there. Absolutely. So talk to me a bit about your journey with these stories, because they really are fascinating and they intertwine with faith, with politics, with culture, with general society. What was it that brought your attention to comic books and superhero films? And what do you think they have to say to society right now?
There's a lot there. For me personally, my embrace of comic books starts probably as a preteen, and I can remember late 70s going to the comic book store near my house, and Chris Claremont's sort of uncanny X-Men was really speaking to me, the idea of as a, I'm going to say this up front, as a Jewish, Mexican American, and queer person, all of those identities, to find this comic book where teenagers were grappling with essentially coming of age and being excluded from society because of the gifts that they found as teenagers, was really speaking to some of the things that I was going on in my head and in my life and my sort of personal journey.
Yeah.
And so it gave me access and language that really helped me at a very important point. And that's really my journey into comic books. Everything else starts from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So did you feel like it helped you make sense of what you were trying to understand about your own life? Was it something where it was sort of like helping other people make sense to you? Like, where did you see the reflection point? Did it hold a mirror up to you or hold a mirror up to society?
I think both, in the sense that it was amazing as a young person to read these characters who, in some ways, I could relate to. What their journeys were, what their fears were, these stories of kids who were afraid to discover their powers, who were immediately turned on by family members, afraid to talk to their parents about them. That resonated.
No doubt. No doubt. And I think what's so powerful, or dare I say uncanny, about the X-Men is that they really have a way of representing so many marginalized groups simultaneously, right? So going from the Professor X representing Dr. King and Magneto representing Malcolm X, you can also see the way that it speaks to queer experience, the way it speaks to the migrant experience, the way it speaks to generally the other, and just the ways in which people have been otherized and made to feel lesser than because of their uniqueness. And I think that's just what part of like the universality of X-Men in particular that I really love, is that it really speaks to all sorts of people and it resonates. It has that sort of thread of the human experience.
Yeah. Well, two things about what you just said that really resonate and I want to speak to, one of which is early on, I have personally appreciated and enjoyed the team comic books, probably more than the individualized ones, although I've certainly over the years gotten into both. And part of those team comics, like the X-Men, and another that was a team book that I was reading in that period, the Legion of Superheroes from DC, was when you have a large cast, when you have many characters, you can really put diversity forward in your heroes and in their experiences, because you had people from all over the world, or in the Legion from all over the galaxy, with different narratives, different experiences, different identities working together, allowed for, I think, a more robust storytelling. And I also want to lift up, I love that you talked about Malcolm X and Dr. King and the relationship between Magneto and Charles Xavier.
Yeah.
I will say I come to that, and I totally see that, and I read a lot about sort of that sort of identity. And it's also true that the writers of the time, including Chris Claremont, who was Jewish, talked about it in the context of Jewish figures in history. Like he saw them as maybe, Ben Gurion the founding fathers of the state of Israel, or they had a conversation.
Right.
Obviously, Magneto was a Holocaust survivor. The conversation
Right. Right.
about Jewish post-Holocaust liberation
Mm,
politics, and Claremont
absolutely.
and other writers have said very specifically that they were writing in a post-Holocaust Jewish conversation about liberation
Right.
into those
Right.
characters. And the fact that it
Absolutely.
resonates for you through the lens of Malcolm X, or it resonates for somebody else, including myself, through queer identity as well,
Mhm. Yeah.
speaks to their brilliance, that they could
Right.
take what meant something to them and speak to many people through it.
Yeah. And there's something to be said. I love that you're bringing this up because there's something to be said about that sort of post-Holocaust immersion of all of these different comic book, now iconic superhero figures. And just thinking about this like horrific, stain on history and having how people who experienced that, who lived through that, whose families experienced it, how they went through that and said, we're going to like tell these stories about these, whether it's a Kryptonian landing in Kansas or whatever the case may be, all these wonderful stories that help people understand where do we go from here,
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
powerful.
And I guess you're really teeing it up to get us to like Captain America, because obviously the first Captain America, Steve Rogers,
Right.
was originally introduced as immediately before World War II by Jewish artists in New York who
Mhm.
were commenting on the American idea and Nazis, and commenting and making a comment on America needing to engage this rising Nazi empire even before the Holocaust. So
Right.
much so that, like, right, the very first cover of Steve Rogers is literally punching it.
Exactly. Exactly. And I have nothing but love for Steve Rogers. He's from Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn. That's my guy. You know, and just thinking about the way that when he was being introduced onto the screen and was being portrayed for the first time in the Avengers, the actor who was portraying him made a point of saying, I feel like there are some, as Chris Evans was saying, that there are some ways in which, yes, he's red, white, and blue, but it's not just about representing Americanism. There's a certain idea and a certain virtue that, it's true to even the comic books when Steve Rogers goes on not just to be Captain America, but also becomes Nomad, like the man without a country, and is
Yeah.
fighting for these ideals. That I noticed in a recent interview that when the brothers playing Sam Wilson has said the same thing. People are like, "Whoa, what do you mean? Like he's American, like he's Captain America." But just thinking about the ways in which, from its inception, Captain America was really like sounding an alarm for America about its own virtues and its participation in the world, far more than just sort of like holding up and preserving some sort of mythology about, American superiority to everyone else.
Yeah. I really love that you raised that, because I think it really goes to some of the complexity and the blowback that the Sam Wilson version of Captain America experienced, when he became the captain in the comic books, and how they positioned him, and maybe some of what a lot of us are probably worried about in the
Yeah,
coming weeks is how he's
for
going to be
sure.
received on the big screen.
Absolutely. 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 So what would you say, thinking about this movie coming out in a couple of weeks as we're recording it, what makes you most excited about this movie?
Oh gosh. I know we can unpack this more in a few minutes, but
Here for it?
I am holding my excitement in check,
Yeah.
because there's a bunch of things about this movie that I want to be excited about, but
Mm,
Marvel has a really poor track record
yeah.
in the movies of bringing these characters forward in their full self and leaning into some of the more, I'm going to call it edgy, to be nice
Sure.
to Marvel, for a big global corporate conglomerate rolling out some of these characters and themes.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, as I said, as a Mexican American Jew, I'm very excited to see them introduce the character of Joaquin Torres, the second
Yeah.
Falcon.
Right.
I'm trying to wrap my head around. I don't think that we've seen a Latino superhero on the big screen yet in the MCU.
The sister who played America Gonzalez in Doctor
Right.
Strange
Yes.
too.
Doctor Strange. But that was
But
like
she's not, but to your point, she's not like a
yeah,
main character in this way, to your
right.
point.
And they haven't brought her back, and maybe they will, but you're right. It's been limited. America Chavez was one character. So, like, there's been a lack of that, and he's a really interesting character in the comic books.
For sure.
Likewise, I'm excited for the introduction of the character Sabra from the comic
Right.
books, who is an Israeli character.
Yes.
But in both cases, I don't know if Disney has the will to lean into those characters in the fullness in which they're in the comic.
Absolutely. And thinking about the way in which, particularly with the Sabra character, they've already sort of like pump faked a few times on how to present her.
Yeah.
There was a point where they were really toning down the Israeli connection. This time they're like, okay, well, we won't have the Israeli flag on her uniform, but she's still going to be from Israel, but she's not going to be part of the side. Like they just kept doing this weird dance. And does that strike you as erasure, or just people, or as best as a corporation can be sensitive, them trying to be sensitive to the politics of the moment, the cultural moments?
Well, I think there are a couple of things going on there. And like, we have to say this, like, we don't know how she's actually going to show up on the big screen.
Fair. This is fair.
So like at this point, they have said so many things over the last couple of years about this. All we know is that an Israeli actress, Shira Haas, is playing a character that has been in their own promo, not in the promos, but in their own literature around the film, presented with the name Ruth Batserov, with the Sabra in the comic books. But on screen, all we've seen of her is out of uniform. So we don't know if she's going to present with powers. We don't know if she's going to
That's right.
present in costume on screen. We just don't know.
No.
It's interesting. There's been public black, and let's just, name that certainly in parts of, let's say, the Arab world and others, there's been like, an Israeli character tied to the Mossad. What does that mean? Some films don't get to show in every country.
Right.
Having said that, like Disney Marvel knew who she was when they decided to write her into this movie. Like they knew what they were doing, and in the sense, like they chose an Israeli. There are other Jewish characters that haven't been introduced yet in the movies. They went with her.
Yeah.
So like, it's kind of like if you're gonna stick your toe in the water, don't pull it out the moment like the heat turns up a little bit.
Sure.
And there are ways of presenting a character that are different. Like I personally, one of the reports is that she will be presented not as a Mossad officer, which by the way is not the only way she appears in the comics. Sometimes she's like a Tel Aviv policewoman. So like she's had her own journey in terms of her jobs in the comic books. But the reports are that they're going to present her as a Black Widow trainee as well.
Right.
Well, okay, fine, whatever. It's not like there's some inherent character of a person about who they work for and what secret agency they are trained by. That's not core to one's identity. If, however, she's presented as not an Israeli, that's not
problematic.
Jewish, given that her inherent identity as a character, even the name of the character and her identity in the comic books are as Israel's national hero, that would feel like erasure.
For sure. I hear that.
But we could say the same thing about the new Falcon. Frankly, we could say the same thing about Sam Wilson. How are they going to present him? There are just a lot of characters in this film, and maybe people aren't familiar. I know Joaquin Torres' Falcon is not well known to a lot of people, so I'm guessing people are, who are you talking about? But in the comic books, he's introduced essentially the minute Sam Wilson becomes the captain. And the context in which he's introduced is that he is a Mexican-American migrant, essentially what we would call a dreamer.
Right.
And their first interactions are when this kid is helping migrants cross the border and the desert. And, he's giving them water, he's giving them food in the Arizona desert. And Sam Wilson shows up to get into a fight with, one of these like right-wing supremacist border patrol volunteer militias.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So like that's an interesting narrative about those two characters.
Yes, it is.
In this moment in the United States.
Right.
Is Disney going to lean into that, ignore it, present him differently? That's a big question.
And I'm of two minds, because there's a way that I think people's ears are so closed that just without saying a word, any of the characters we just mentioned represent, the what I'm going to call the theft of the word woke, and they'll just be described as just a wokeness and dismissed as such, right? Like just the very mere presence of a Mexican American Falcon, people won't care about any characterization beyond that. That's all that'll matter to them. So I'm of the mind that because people aren't going to pay attention anyway, you might as well do the story correctly in a way that actually has some sort of meaning. And from my estimation, superhero movies, comic books are supposed to make us want to pursue some sort of virtue and make us want to say, wow, the way that this person is taking care of people, the way this person is sacrificing on behalf of others should inspire something in me rather than,
Yeah,
positioning myself as like, why are they doing that? That's not my politics. Like, it just seems kind of lazy, honestly.
I totally agree with you, Chris.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how, in your estimation, Jeremy, do you think superhero films can do a better job of representing the sort of inclusion that we're talking about? Whether we're talking about LGBTQ plus characters, we're talking about characters with disabilities, multiracial characters, the whole, you know, display of what the human experience actually is, rather than something so homogenous. Like, how can superhero films do a better job of
And I think first and foremost, have more characters on
it?
screen. And I appreciate you bringing up America Chavez. To be honest, I watched that film once and have not watched it again because
Yeah,
it
it
was
wasn't
not
great.
particularly good.
No.
But, when you only have one character, and this is true in life, if you only
Mhm.
have one member of a minority, say in the US Senate, the pressure
Right.
on them to speak for everybody of their community. If you only have
Right.
one person in a setting, it's like, what do your people think,
Yeah.
or you represent all of your people, so to speak. And the same
Yeah.
thing happens in the comic books and on screen. If there's only one LGBTQ character, that puts a lot of pressure on, like, that character is somehow supposed to represent all of the realities, all of the experiences of a diverse community. When you only have one Jewish character, one Black character, and so on and so forth. So there's a huge need just to have more. One of the places where the MCU has gotten better, not a gold star yet, but better,
Right.
is
On their
certainly
way.
with representation of Black characters, right? The first Avengers movies were like all white,
Yeah.
basically practically all
Entirely.
male, you know,
Yeah.
and you can't say like the Black Panther or Luke Cage, who has not come to the big screen, or Sam Wilson, and we can go down the list. No one of them speaks for or represents all of the Black experience. But once you have 4 or 5 or 6 of these characters regularly in the films in different ways, one doesn't look at one of them and say, oh, that one is representing everything or needs to represent everything. And we're not there yet. I would say getting better in terms of Black experience on screen in the MCU. We've got a long way to go
For
in
sure.
terms of Latino, Jewish, LGBTQ, disability. Like, there's just a long way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how can a studio, how can a corporation do this in a way that's authentic and not just performing, right? Because there's so much thoughtfulness and intention that has to go into it, from like the crafting of the script. Like, I'll tell you this, Jeremy, I love watching older television shows, and I
Yeah.
can always tell when a white writer is writing for like a Black character. Like, it just feels this sort of like manufactured. No one would actually say this in real life. I can just like feel it, like jumping off the pages, like jumping off the screen to me. And I think that what we're talking about requires not just, getting Denzel Washington to be in Black Panther 3, right? It requires, the writers in the room, the producers, the directors, like everyone who's a part of the storytelling experience, to have enough people in that room where you can tell these stories authentically. And I think part of it is a lot of people in our country don't have enough at bats with people who are different from them. And so if I'm working on this film and you tell me, Chris, this is cool so far, but you need to get some Mexican Americans or some Jewish folks or some queer folks in the room. And I'm like, well, Jeremy, who do you know? Like, it should be authentic for me to say, oh yeah, you know what? I know where I can find folks who are going to be able to tell these stories well, and not just immediately be like, well, Jeremy, you help me now. You have to write the whole thing now. Like, it can't be that. And too often it is that,
Well, there's a lot of things that are going on in terms of like what you're talking about and what could be done better and how to do it better. And by the way, just as an aside, because you brought it up, Denzel, my personal, like, we all have our what we're rooting for in the next version. My
Here for it.
personal hope is that the next Black Panther is the version it was Casper Cole in the comic
Mm,
books. Folks, 25 years ago, they killed off the Black Panther, and then briefly a New York City policeman named Casper Cole stepped into the role of the Black Panther. Now, what
Wow.
I personally like about Casper Cole is he's an Afro-Latino Jew, and all of that shows up in how they write him in the book. And I would
Come
love to see
on.
that character on screen. But one
I'm
can
here
hope.
for this.
One can hope. To your point, so I'll speak from a Jewish place, for example, in
Mhm.
the Agatha All Along. I think they did
Yeah.
some things really, really well. They didn't make a Wiccan's Jewishness central to every moment. They didn't have to have like writing it, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew every episode, but they took 15, 20 minutes and did one deep dive into his bar mitzvah scene in a
Yeah. Yeah.
synagogue.
Yeah.
So like it was not a blink and you miss it moment of Jewishness. It was
Right.
right there. It was central to the story and the character development.
Mm.
And they brought in a rabbi to work with them to select the Torah portion, the Bible portion that he was reading, to help them with the how should the room look, what do we stage it, and she then plays the role. The rabbi, who was the consultant, actually plays the rabbi on screen.
That's
So
awesome.
you don't have to be a Jewish writer or an executive producer to get it right. You can bring
Right.
somebody in and ask for help.
Yes.
That's part of it. I also think, in general, it's not just about writing ethnic identity themed central storylines. It
Mm.
can also be, I just am.
Yeah.
We've named it I am. It's part of who I am, but it doesn't define
Mhm.
every moment of my behavior as a hero. It's not how
Right.
I show up in every moment.
Right.
You want to talk about erasure on screen. I mean, MCU now essentially owns the X-Men movies as part of it. They did a terrible job in the X-Men movies with the Kitty Pryde character, who in the
Yeah.
comic
Yeah. Yeah.
books, she is very Jewish in the comic books, and
Got you.
she wears a Star of David necklace in
Hey.
virtually every scene in the comic book, going back to like her first book in the early 1980s.
Mhm.
She doesn't talk about being Jewish on every page. She talks about
Got you.
being Jewish like once every year or so. They throw something in,
Right.
but the identity's present. I
Yeah.
think one of the best representations of a Jewish character in the entire Marvel line ever was actually done in the Kamala Khan Ms. Marvel comic books, which
Okay.
are written by a Muslim writer.
Right.
He has a Jewish character. It's just one of Kamala's high school friends. And he's just a guy who wears a kippah, uh, who hangs out with her. And like, he's obviously Jewish, but it's not like a big thing. It's not like,
Right.
it just, the same way you would have, I would love to see, in one of these Marvel movies, why not have a background officer on a shield carrier who wears a hijab? You know,
Yeah.
just, normal people going
Right.
about their jobs in the background as supporting
Mm.
characters, but who are also visible. That's
Yeah.
all you got to do sometimes.
No, I love this because that to me is the line between like performative and normalizing.
True.
Because if you just have folks just like as a part of the details, and then it's like, oh, like I peeped that, like, oh, that's really cool. And it doesn't become like now you have to do something that feels inauthentic and just like, wait, where did this come from? Like, there's a way to tell the story, and if a character becomes like a major part of the story, then like, yeah, the the cultural motifs in their lives are going to be part of the major story. But you've already done so much work with the details that it feels organic. Really, really received it. Smart. Absolutely. Absolutely. So talk to me a bit about um thinking about going back to Captain America 4 for a bit, thinking about the ways in which leadership and much of what, Captain America, from what I can tell in this story, he and the president, now being played by Harrison Ford, have a contentious relationship. And I just think it's kind of funny, like the way in which these stories write themselves. Like the president turns into the Red Hulk, and I
Yeah.
assume he's not going to be, like a build by consensus type of leader as Red Hulk. Is my assumption. There may be a little bit more authoritarianism as the guy who's like powered by fire. We'll see. But just wondering, what do you think we can glean about leadership and identity and responsibility from the way that dynamic is being portrayed, where you have this new Captain America who has the cloud or the shadow of the legacy of Steve Rogers hanging over his head. Sam Wilson's maneuvering through that while dealing with a president who may be an adversary. We've yet to see
Mhm.
how it's going to play out in film. Like, what do you think that can tell us about the dynamics of leadership, identity, and responsibility in our own time?
Well, there are a couple things we don't know about the film, so I'm going to be a little bit like, it will be fun and helpful and good to see them explore these. First of all, the Red Hulk in the comic books and in the MCU, this character, which Harrison Ford taken over, is a general. So,
Right.
and there's an earlier Hulk movie in which a different actor plays that role, and it's a
Yeah.
general essentially trying to extract, the ability to create more Hulks from the Hulk
Mhm.
as a military endeavor.
For
So
sure.
here we are in February of 2025, and they are rolling out a film in which a general who may have engaged in some, shall we say, less than ethical scientific experiments
For sure.
has become president of the United States. You have an Israeli character, which we don't know how she's being presented. We have a character that in the comic books is a dreamer who helps migrants on their way to their American stories.
Mhm.
And we have a new Captain America who, in the telling of the comic books, and like this is the Steve Rogers was a Superman, right? He actually had powers, and right, his core identity was around being a soldier for
Yeah.
America and like going to war overseas on behalf of America. That's where he starts from. He's very much operates in the context of a soldier, a member of the army, a military person. The new Captain America, Sam Wilson, is more of a man of the people. And like he
Mhm.
sets out to be, and we saw that in that, not particularly well done, TV show where they sort of
Falcon and
introduced
Winter
them.
Soldier. Yep.
Like he goes into the neighborhoods. Like
Yes.
he's in the streets, so to speak. He's with
That's right.
people. In the comic books, his idea of Captain America is he's going to take sides on political issues. He is going to weigh in on America's policies on immigrants and refugees in the comic book.
Right.
And he's going to piss people off in
For
the comic
sure.
book by doing so. And he does. So, like, how does that play out? Are we going to see a man of the people who doesn't have superpowers but has been entrusted by this man who represents the idea of America, Captain America, to carry the shield, right? It's the
Yeah.
shield that, is
Right.
it the shield that makes the man or the man that makes the
Man, that makes
shield?
it shoot. Right.
And how is he going to interact with a general as president?
Yeah.
Leaving aside the issue of him becoming the Hulk and whether as Hulk he is a threat or not, but like,
Right.
how does he interact with that kind of president as a man of
Yeah.
the people? Is he going to be giving voice to immigrants? Is his sidekick going to explicitly have that identity? It'll
Yeah.
be really interesting to see. But ultimately, the important question is, to what extent does the man make the shield or the shield
Yeah.
make the man? Because Steve Rogers has entrusted. We saw that
For sure.
moment where Steve Rogers
Mhm.
passes the shield to him. The
Right.
question is now, what is he going to do with it? And
Absolutely.
I would hope, I would assume it's not to just be Steve Rogers 2.0.
Right. And in a lot of ways, he could never be Steve, not just because of the lack of super soldier serum, but also what I really appreciated about the show Falcon and Winter Soldier was that he dealt with it in the skin he's in and interacting with the character Isaiah Bradley, who also went through the same experiment that Steve Rogers went through, but had none of the glory that Steve Rogers experienced, right?
Right.
Was like tortured and imprisoned and had like a hard, tough life. And I see him in the trailer. It seems like he's under mind control. He's attacking the president in the Oval Office during one scene in the trailer. But I'm just thinking about the ways in which you describing it, Jeremy. He almost has this. I wanted to say no choice, but that's not entirely true because we see this in real life. But I think as a black man in the United States, if you're a person of integrity, I would then say you have no choice but to interact with everything that you're talking about, paying attention to the margins, paying attention to the way people are being exploited and oppressed, because it's not just going to be taking up the shield and holding up mythology. It's taking up the shield and being like, this shield is literally made from stolen goods from Wakanda. It's it's like taking up the shield and now he's equipped with the armor that comes from Wakanda and understanding that it's not even just about Black people in the United States, but representing the diaspora and representing this like commonality and universality that every one of the human family can be attached to, which is the sense of like pursuing justice and doing things in a way that goes against the mythology that I would argue Thunderbolt Ross absolutely represents. Is like, how do we continue to exploit? How do we continue to extract what we need for the sake of being the most powerful forever and ever?
100%. Yeah. And you're right. Look, Sam Wilson isn't going to be Steve Rogers. And, for a lot of reasons, his story, his journey as a hero are different. Yeah. Just being both he and Bucky, they've both been sort
Yeah,
of like, partners to Steve and
for sure.
his sidekicks,
Yeah,
his compass in a lot of ways.
right,
You know,
right.
part of your identity is like Captain America trusts you to carry on the work because you've always been a moral compass for Captain America.
Right.
Are you going to speak truth to power to others? Are you going to speak truth to power when you carry the shield? Like
Pause.
that's part of the question.
Yeah.
Who does Sam Wilson
Uh-huh. That's
how
real.
does Sam Wilson choose to lead
Right.
in this new role?
No, absolutely. Because he's torn in a way that I think a lot of us who represent minoritized identities and we're quote unquote moving up in the world, we're in leadership positions, we're more public facing spaces, there is this pull of like, how are you going to keep it real, frankly, or are you going to become a part of the machine? And I think that he's playing that out in a superhero film, but I think that resonates with a lot of the choices we all have to make as we're in leadership.
Yeah, 100%.
No doubt, no doubt. So talk to me a bit about what piece of advice, if Sam Wilson called you and said, Jeremy, I need your help, what piece of advice would you give him as captain?
Be true to yourself. Trust in that part of you that Steve Rogers trusted to give you the shield.
There it is. Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
And if you could look at the landscape, 2025, looking at the next decade of films, we've been seeing superhero films on the big screen for close to 50 years now, going back to like Superman 77, 78. But
Yeah.
thinking about the next decade with all that we can anticipate, the unknowns coming down the pike, what do you hope superhero films look like? What is the trend or the change that you hope they have, if we're revisiting this in 2035?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I really hope that they will lean harder into stories that really make us think about the challenges of the world. I think the comic books have always done that. And certainly in the MCU, this first 20 almost years have dabbled, but never quite gone all the way into the hard moral questions that the comic books were asking. So I hope we see less. I mean, I get it. This is a global audience and these are big budget. So you got to have that big fight scene and lots of punching. But I hope that there is more of, examining the underlying why they're fighting and not just having a good fight.
Right. For sure.
And, that for me is what I want to see more of. These are human beings, well, mostly they're human beings, one or two are gods.
Right. Right.
But to the extent that they are flawed human beings and they shouldn't be presented as perfect, and they're not presented as perfect. I love that they present them with flaws.
Absolutely.
Tony Stark does not come across as a perfect person.
Far from it.
And I hope that they continue to do that, present flawed people. One of the things that excites me about Sam Wilson, and I think is really important, is that he's not superpowered. That there are everyday people can become heroes with a couple of good gadgets.
That's right.
But it isn't their powers, it isn't being godlings or whatever that makes them superheroes. It's their moral center, it's their courage, it's their sense of obligation to community, it's their sense of responsibility to use the powers that they have. In a way, it's Spider-Man for me is like, the best of the best, with great power comes great responsibility.
That's right. That's right.
And so I want to see more of that.
Yeah.
And less like, don't give me the 40-50 minute big battle where everybody's on the field and, in Infinity Endgame. Give me the hard conversation, in somebody's like living room as the heroes are regrouping after losing a fight.
That's it. That's it. That's what made me love the beginning of Endgame and all of Infinity War a lot more than like the last half of Endgame. Like, it was exciting in the movie theater. Don't get me wrong. I was cheering with everyone. Cat picks up the Mjolnir. Like, I'm hyped too, right? Like, but at the same time, there's something about, and I actually was just writing about this on my Substack, posted yesterday. I think that when we see great leaders, I wasn't talking about superheroes, but I was talking about the icons of our time, like the Nelson Mandelas of the world, Gandhi's, Malala, people like this. And we say, wow, they were so brave. They were so courageous. They were just awesome. And then the subtext is, I could never do that. Like, I can't be
Right.
brave. I can't have courage because they were just a really special person. Like, maybe God called them to do that. And that's why they did it. Cause I certainly can't do it. And I think that when we do that, we actually head toward catastrophe, because then we sort of like outsource all of the good, brave things in the world to these special people who are like, how often do they come around? But I think we have to understand that all of those people that we're holding up on this pedestal were human beings just like us, and that it's up to us to have collective courage in scary times. And
Absolutely. And I think, this character, this version of Captain America can really inspire the best of us about what it's asking the question, what is our idea of America?
yes,
What's if Captain America is the symbol of America, and each person who does it is taking on that symbol, they also get to define that symbol for us and invite us into a conversation about what that symbol means.
for sure.
And we get to respond. We get to stand up and say, yeah, these are ideas worth fighting for, whatever that means.
Yeah, here for it. Here for it. What do you think about the folks who are just so locked in their mindset about not wanting to hear anything that we're talking about? The people who they wouldn't even listen to this podcast, I don't think. They would just see us as
I got you.
so how do we step forward? Do we continue to just build and just have these sort of like resonating conversations with people who, they're like, oh yeah, I kind of get with what Jeremy's talking about. I can get with what Chris is talking about. Is there any importance from your lens in like not even reaching across the aisle, but going outside of this space that we not even want it to be an echo chamber, but it's kind of been forced to be an echo chamber because people who disagree just polarize and go somewhere else? What's our course forward? Like, how do we get people who are just adamantly opposed to all the things that we're kicking in this conversation today to warm to the notion of like there's another path rather than just being polarized and living in echo chambers?
There was a backlash to Sam Wilson as Captain America in the comic books. I imagine that there are people who think that they're MCU fans who are not gonna, want to see this film just because he can't be Captain America.
Right, right.
And I want to go ask them, like, what are you so afraid of? And I don't mean that with judgment. I mean that with genuine curiosity.
Yes.
Tell me what is so scary about having a Black Captain America.
Right.
Let's talk about and point out, like, there's all these other characters. There are lots of heroes. Nobody's saying that you or people like you can't be heroes.
No.
But what is scary about like painting a much more broad picture, a mosaic of America on the screen?
Right.
And let's have that conversation.
Yes.
And like, somebody wants to boycott this film because of who's in it, so then I want to say, like, you're missing something.
I agree.
Hopefully you're missing a good film.
Yeah, that's my hope too, right? Because that's the thing. Like, the movie has to. I mean, all the movies need to be good, but sometimes I feel like a little extra pressure, right? Like, when it's a movie like this, I get a little. I really hope it's good.
I mean, there is going to be pressure. I mean, look, there's a lot of conversation. What happened when the Marvel movie didn't perform that well, and what does that mean about female leads as superheroes? It's like, really? Now granted, there were some parts that were just like goofy and not particularly good, but like, hey, why not have 3 female superheroes, on screen having a space adventure?
And also, when I go watch these movies, whether I'm watching with my kids, my friends, myself, I'm not going there expecting to see The Godfather, right? I'm not going there expecting to see like, the Citizen Kane or something. I was like, this is going to be a fun movie at its baseline. And then I get the like surprise gift of like, oh, this was a profound moment. Like I didn't, when I went into the Black Panther 1, for example,
Yeah.
I didn't know that movie was going to be that profound. I was like, oh, this is going to be cool. I was like, this is a profound film. I didn't sign up for that, but I was happy to receive it. I just don't know. And even going back to like the Marvels that you brought up, Jeremy, I am keenly aware of like the organized sabotage of like their Rotten Tomato score and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So the movie was not amazing, but it was fine.
Yeah,
Like I
it's
could
fun.
finish it. It was fun. There's some movies like respectfully, Flash was a terrible movie. I couldn't finish that movie. Like I watched it one time. I was like, I want my money back. This movie's bad. But the Marvels was okay. You know what I mean? Like good B minus, C plus. It was fine. So I guess I say that to say that like some of these things, while people are like, oh, that movie wasn't great. I was like, but you also were like tipping the scale for it to be even like worse received than it actually was.
Yeah, and maybe that also comes back to the conversation we were having about sort of like make more. When you
Yeah.
only have one, it puts so much
Right.
pressure on that film. And like,
No doubt.
no doubt, like Black Panther, the pressure on that film before it was released to be successful,
My goodness.
the rolling out of for the first time a Black superhero film, there was
Yeah.
a lot of pressure on that. That it then
No
went on
question.
to perform blockbuster, and that it was
Right.
actually a great film, not just a
Right.
good film, but a great film.
Great. Yeah.
One, it met the moment of the
Yeah.
pressure and also
For
created
sure.
space for more to follow, including this
Yes.
coming Captain America film.
Absolutely.
But there wouldn't have been that much pressure on it if there were already several other films with Black leading characters. And I
Question.
would say the same thing. The pressure and the anxiety that we in the Jewish community of fans are feeling about the Sabra character, or
Yeah.
the doubts I'm feeling about whether they can meet the moment on talking about migrants and refugees in this film,
Yeah.
it's because they haven't been,
Right.
And so like, we haven't talked about it, but the coming Fantastic Four movie is,
Mhm.
also the Thing is a Jewish character. They've done a
That's right.
garbage job of presenting the Thing as a Jewish character
For
in the
sure.
previous Fantastic Four films. This
Yeah.
year, for the first time, with this Captain America movie and then the coming Fantastic Four movie, we're going to have two Jewish characters on screen played by Jewish actors.
That's right. That's right.
I want to make, I hope they meet the moment, but I
Yeah.
also think that moment would be less pressured if they hadn't
Mhm.
blown it so much or not had it there before.
That's real. That's real. That's very real. Well, I know the brother that's going to be playing the Thing, he's in The Bear. He's fantastic in The Bear.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited for him to be in Fantastic Four. 'Cause he's a remarkable actor. Absolutely. So I think he'll meet the mark, but it's also based on what kind of content will he get in order to be able to do what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So wait, going back to Sabra for a bit, thinking about the way that she's been portrayed in the comic books, I'm thinking about the ways in which, and you tell me if this is not a fair comparison, but the way in which T'Challa has become, a Halloween costume and sort of, I had a friend who he named his first rap album T'Challa. This is like 20 years ago, right? And I was like, who is T'Challa? And he put me on the Black Panther, the comic books and all that. So thinking about the way in which like Black Panther has meant something to the Black community, is it fair to say Sabra represents that for like Israeli comic book fans or Jewish comic book fans? Is she like a major, like, that's our person kind of character? Like, help put me on right now. Is that kind of been the reception?
Honestly, no.
Okay.
The answer is no. I mean, she's a much lower profile character than
Got
the
you.
Black Panther is in the Marvel comic
Sure.
books.
Sure.
There are higher profile Jewish characters in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
Kitty Pryde, Magneto,
Right.
Moon Knight, who
Yeah.
had his series on Disney. Those are higher profile characters and much better known amongst Jewish comic book fans.
Got you.
It is an interesting choice even to pull her into this movie in the first place.
Yeah. Right.
For whatever, I'm not in the producer's room where they make the decision
Sure.
about what new characters to introduce, but she's definitely a lower profile and historically is more tied to the X-Men than to the Avengers universe in the comic
She's
book.
a mutant in the comics, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
So I don't think there's as much resting on her to be the Jewish character amongst
Got
Jewish
you.
comic book fans. I think the controversy over how she has been or will be
Yeah,
presented in 2 weeks
got you.
has raised her profile in Jewish space.
For
You know,
sure, for
there's
sure.
there's there's a whole bunch of folks over the last 18 months who've been like approaching nerds like me and saying, "Who is Sabra and why does she matter?" And I'm like, "Oh, let me tell you about Sabra."
Let me put you on real quick. I hear that because as you were talking about and going through all the Jewish characters, like what I think about in terms of like both religious and cultural identity was I used to love the X-Men cartoon back in the 90s, and they had the episode with Nightcrawler is first introduced. I joke about it as a Christian that this is when he introduces Wolverine to Jesus. You see Wolverine at the end
Uh-huh.
of the episode read the Psalms
Uh-huh.
and all that. And so there was a way that they presented it, and like Nightcrawler, I was like, oh yeah, Nightcrawler, that's the priest, and he's like, from I guess like Germany, Austria, somewhere in Central Europe, but he's just like this, like he doesn't kill everyone because he's like, this is what the Lord wants from me. He has like a deep moral compass because of his faith. And I think there's a way, in my estimation, that was brilliantly done, that you could authentically weave Sabra's Jewish identity and Israeli identity in without it being something where it just becomes like a landmine for people, except for the folks who just the mere presence of a Jewish person, the mere presence of an Israeli person is just such a volatile thing for them. And they're just like, I don't want to deal with this in the first place.
And that's why I say I would like if they are not introducing her as a Mossad officer, both
Yeah.
because they're trying to reach a global audience and because they've really only introduced one sort of secret agency as like the dark agency around the globe, and they want everybody to come out of that, and that's
Yeah.
the Black Widows. Whatever, fine.
Yeah.
And I would also say let's have other superheroes. Let's have Arab superheroes.
Yes.
Let's have, and there are some in the comic books. Let's bring them forward.
And then
Would love to see her paired with you know another character and do them both, have them both, and have them navigate that. In the comic books, there are moments
yeah,
where she and like the Arabian Night. I know that name is like such a
it's the
whatever,
lowest of
but like
hanging fruits, right?
the lowest of hanging fruit. But like okay, so there's an Arabian national superhero that she navigates a complicated relationship with as sort of like you know frenemies at times in the
Right.
comic books. Put them both on the screen together and let's have some fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, and deal with that tension. I like that. I like that. I think that could be really healthy for sure. Talk to me before we close, like with your work, how do you find yourself weaving in your work with the Jewish community in Boston with having these conversations about films? Like I know we got introduced because of the wonderful workshop you had done in the fall. Talk to me
Thank you.
about the way in which you have found this to be an access point for people to really engage in more tangible concepts and aspects of their life.
Look, for me, comic books is my outlet. As I told you, like since I was a kid, it was a place I went
Yeah.
to see myself and be seen and see characters that spoke to me and resonated. It's been an outlet for me, even in challenging times like now on a day-to-day basis, just to, hey, it's been a long day, read a comic book. So like
Yeah.
I come to it purely from a place of joy and fun and embracing the comic book culture and the art and the artists. And comic books have something to say about our world. And comic books have something to say about the challenging issues in our world. And you think about, great storylines like a Marvel Civil War, which had so
Yeah.
much to say about America in the post 9/11 world, or
Right.
the Secret Wars and what it has to say about the other and the enemy within, and
Mhm.
what are the threats to society. Those are like great commentaries on the world. One of those things is identity.
Yeah.
And in the comic books, and thank you for mentioning the talk I did in the fall, the story that we as Jewish Americans have been telling ourselves and telling
Mhm.
others about us, and how that connects to the stories that others are telling about their identity and their American journey. And
Mhm.
I think it's an amazing part of the comic book story is the way that Jewish writers in the 1930s, 40s were trying to tell a story about their idea of America and their idea of Jewish identity. And it was Jewish writers in the 60s who started to bring in and lots of other characters like the Black Panther who
Mhm.
embraced the idea that identity mattered and identity and diversity had to be part of the stories they were telling. And then working their way back to ultimately in the 80s, introducing characters with Jewish identities
That's
after
right.
they had already brought inclusion into their work.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's a part of our story as a community. And I love telling that story. And I love helping us see the way we as a community have played a role and have found a voice in art through
Gotcha.
comic books in America, and how
Right.
other communities are finding a voice through art. I mentioned, the Kamala Khan book and how a Muslim writer, Ruby, what's her name? Willow Wilson. Sorry.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, she, I think, created one of the best Jewish characters as a background character. But she's also like, writers like her are the ones who are now bringing Muslim stories into this art form. And I think that's important too. It's
For sure.
great to see other communities embracing what we did, Jewish writers, I should say we myself, as Jewish writers in my community
Yeah.
did 50 years ago about having their American conversation through comic books.
Right.
And I think it's a platform and a vehicle that connects us all and allows us all to have a conversation about
Mhm.
identity, about visibility, and about challenging issues. And that's the conversation I
Absolutely.
love having that brings my personal passion together with my work of
Mhm.
community building and advocacy and what it means to build a more democratic and just America in a very
There it is. Yeah, tough time for sure. For sure. Well, Jeremy, we are grateful for you and grateful for your work. Is there any way that we can, as folks who are watching this and listening to this, how can we be supportive of what you're doing?
I think we just got to keep all talking to each other and reaching out to each other. I just love that you reach out to me to have a conversation. I love that we can have a conversation about this
For
film
sure.
and have fun. And I think, invite people to follow me on X at BurtonJM. I talk about comic books there. I talk about, some of this there and, other platforms, trying to get away from X these days for a lot of reasons.
Well, I said you might be the last one left, man. I jumped out of that shit.
Yeah. Forgive me for that.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
But I think we just got to keep talking to each other and being in a relationship and listening, just listening to each other and our stories and celebrating when our stories are told and noticing
Agreed.
when they're not.
Right. That part. That part for sure. The Well, friends, as always, you can find this and all of our conversations at www.baddestchaplain.com. Please follow and subscribe on Substack. We have pretty cool conversations going on over there. And this has just been an honor and a joy. So till next time, take care of yourselves and be well. Peace.
Thanks for having me.